The military-industrial complex is getting worse. There is a New York Times article that shines light on the evolving nature of this creature from hell. Of course, true to its regime-supporting mission, the New York Times doesn't criticize the beast, but writes about it in admiration for the way in which it is working now with cool, hip, young startups. Let's have a look at this. The article is here. Its title is New Spin on a Revolving Door, Pentagon Officials Turned Venture Capitalists. And as an example, it gives proudly Mr. Mark T. Esper, the former defense secretary who has joined a venture capital firm that invests in military startups. And you can see how the people who do this are very happy with what they're doing. I mean, this former defense secretary is standing like in a very cool fashion in front of military equipment here, right, in front of a tank, showing off also his Apple Watch, like, being hip. And the interesting thing about this article is that apparently the military industrial complex is now changing. So retired officers and departing defense officials are flocking to investment firms that are pushing the government to provide more money to defense technology startups. So apparently there is this new trend, and the trend is going towards raining more money on new firms that haven't existed so far and that are not the major benefactors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, but new private sector companies that then can create those weapons of doom and mass destruction that are going to kill tens, hundreds of thousands of people far away from the shores of the United States. So retiring generals and departing top Pentagon officials once migrated regularly to the big establishment weapon makers like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, but now they're increasingly flocking to venture capital firms. They're not going to the startups themselves, they go to the venture capital firms that fund them, that have collectively pumped billions of dollars into Silicon Valley style startups, offering the Pentagon new warfighting tools like autonomous killer drones. I mean, who doesn't want autonomous killer drones? Isn't it wonderful? Back in the bad old days, the Obama administration still had to decide themselves whom they wanted to kill in Afghanistan, how many innocent families they wanted to eradicate. By now, autonomous killer drones are the name of the game. These AI tools are now going to take all the kill decisions by themselves. Hypersonic jets and space surveillance equipment. And that's where those new startups come in, those hip, fashionable startups that then can produce weaponry that the older, bigger corporations are just a little bit too sluggish to do. This new route to the private sector is one indicator of the ways in which the United States is trying to become more agile in harnessing technological advances for the purpose of killing more people. We need technological advances to kill more people, and we will see in the article how this has already been playing out with big establishment names, actually. So it's not only the little startups that are involved here and government, it's also big tech and the people behind big tech that get a piece of the pie. The New York Times has identified at least 50 former Pentagon and national security officials, most of whom left the federal government in the last 5 years, who are now working in defense-related venture capital or private equity as executives or advisors. In many cases, the Times confirmed that they continue to interact regularly with Pentagon officials or members of Congress to push for policy changes or increase in military spending that could benefit firms they have invested in. So this is partially the old narrative that we already know, right? Public officials who used to be in office, either elected or appointed, and then serve in those capacities, and then they go on after they're done, and they get way more lucrative deals being in the top boards of companies that provide then the technology that they in their former capacity, these people were either supposed to regulate or that they had already worked with for investments. And in other countries or in other circumstances, this would be clear cases of bribery and corruption, but it is baked into the system with a legal framework around it. So nobody actually does something illegal. It just seems highly immoral, and we will see more of this. And there's these huge gatherings, right? Here we have a picture of one of those where top officials, including the current Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, then meets with the defense industry crowd and with the startup crowd, and where people shake hands and exchange business cards. Here he is, the current Minister of Defense, and all these folks meet and mingle. This new generation of venture capitalists has big incentives to tap into the network of government and military contacts, many of whom it previously helped move ahead in their careers, right? The people that you worked with previously and still know, you now contact them and tell them, look, I have invested so and so much money in this company because it is awesome and it creates all of these great killer drones. You should really buy more killer drones. Please buy the killer drones. And because they have actually the phone numbers of these people, these former officials become very valuable to the venture capitalist firms, who depend on the fact that then some of the companies that they give the money to, that those companies succeed. That's what venture capitalists want. They give a lot of seed money, and then they hope that one or two of the companies then make it big, and they 100x or the 1000x their investments. But they do so also through the back door of hiring people who then can call other people to say, like, hey, you should really buy this equipment, or give these people a contract. And the crazy thing about this is the framing of the entire thing, at least in this article. A few years back, you would have gone to be executive vice president at Lockheed Martin. Totally not sexy. I mean, if you were a former minister of the Secretary of Defense, you would go on to be then on the board of Lockheed Martin. Not sexy. That's not sexy anymore. The new sexy in Washington and Silicon Valley is now a venture capital guy comes up and says, I will pay you twice as much. I will give you a cut in the form of carried interest in the deal, and you will be hobnob with the CEOs of the companies we invest in. It's much more attractive. So apparently this is now a question of sexiness. How do you interact with the military industrial complex? Are you in the hip crowd, or are you in the old fashioned crowd of going onto the boards? Funny thing is, like, okay, it's obviously not a secret. This is just how the system works. The idea that business and government are apart from each other really only exists in fairy tale land, especially in all of these national security affairs. The government, the US government, and the private corporations are basically one heart and one soul, and they not only work hand in hand, it is the same people who work them. That's the important thing to understand about the US way of producing its equipment, and then also using it, of course, right? Because when we talk about military equipment, you need to use it in order to then replenish it. And that's what we are seeing, right? A constant onslaught of wars that are being created around the world in order to use the equipment that this machinery produces. The new venture capitalists say they typically use their access to press the Pentagon to provide more funding for emerging technologies. I can really leverage my experience, my position, my voice to help accelerate innovation adoption, says this warmonger Esper, who frames it as accelerated innovation, right? Not as death and destruction bringing potential. I will bring more death to more people with more innovative ways. That's what these people are saying. And apparently this is now more fashionable to do through startups because more agile. The military-industrial congressional complex is pretty comfortable with market share as it is. So it's a pre-cooked system that needs to be shaken up a little bit, is what warmongers and neocons and so on are saying, to be innovative in the killing space. Fantastic framing, absolutely fantastic. In the last 4 years, get this, at least $125 billion of venture capital has flooded into startups that build defense technology. So this is money not from the Pentagon, this is money from the private sector that goes into startups, which then hire these people from the government to push their former colleagues to buy the stuff that these startups now produce, and then create a return for the capitalists. It is really one of the ugliest faces of capitalism. $125 billion that the sector is raining on the defense industry in order to create more death and destruction around the world, because it's of course not only the US government that uses US weapons, it's the entire world. I mean, the US government will then itself try to have like foreign governments buy their stuff, right, and thereby further contribute to this system of militarism. And so it is these bombs and these killer drones that are being developed by these men through the funding of these venture capitalists that then go on and kill a lot of people in the Middle East, that kill a lot of people all around the world, not just by US government, also by others. It's absolutely a fantastic system. But at least so far, the defense tech sector has had only a few breakthrough success stories, actually. They include Palantir, which makes artificial intelligence software, so software used to kill artificially, well, and went public in 2020, and Elon Musk's SpaceX, which has a market valuation of more than $175 billion, larger than the market capitalization of Lockheed Martin, the world's largest military contractor. And you and I, we usually think about SpaceX as this cool startup that puts rockets into space and then brings them back, and everything is super awesome, and it's just about going to Mars. It's never just about going to Mars. It always has a military component, as we can see here. You know, just last September, 3 months ago, SpaceX won a first Pentagon contract for Starshield, its satellite network for military use. The Pentagon has awarded Elon Musk SpaceX its first confirmed contract for Starshield. A Space Force spokesperson confirmed this is this new military branch, right? U.S. military branch, Space Force, not Air Force, but Space Force. That SpaceX on September 1st was awarded a 1-year contract for Starshield with a maximum value of $70 million. So still quite small. The Pentagon is already a high-value buyer of the company's rocket launchers and had shown increasing interest in Starlink's satellite internet. So, of course, all of these technologies that then SpaceX creates that potentially have a military application will be eventually used for the military. And maybe even the military use goes first in the way that these people think, and then later on you slap some commercial non-military use to it. But so SpaceX and Elon Musk are already providers of defense equipment and, well, let's not kid ourselves, of offensive equipment in order to do more war of the Pentagon. So this is where this new generation of well-connected venture capitalists comes in, because somehow you have to fund these startups and rain money on a whole group of people who can then do like really this cool stuff and experiment around, right? For the warmongers. More than a dozen of them, assisted by think tanks and other non-profits that get funding from venture capital groups. Again, like, this is the entire pie. If you ever hear like this is a non-profit doing XYZ, it doesn't mean that it is a humanistic thing that's going to happen. I mean, think tanks and non-profit organizations, other non-profit organizations, they often just help as part of an entire scheme to turn public funds into death-bringing capacity of the state, and private profit, of course, in the way. There's always private profit that has to come out of this in this capitalist system. And the article goes on. It's actually quite long. So at the annual Reagan National Defense Forum, that's this thing here that we're seeing like all of these pictures from, where like very neat looking people in beautiful uniforms and good suits and so on meet, and then together create all of this death and destruction that then will be rained down on other people's heads. Why they get all of the neat dinners and all of the money out of this. So this Mr. Filippone, and one more warmonger that doesn't need to concern us, this monster here. said he was not even a lobbyist because he's not paid for the advocacy work, and it does not make up at least 20% of his time, the threshold for disclosure in federal law. Almost none of the venture capitalists promoting defense technology are registered as lobbyists. So on top of all the thousands of lobbyists that do officially try to get Congress and so on to buy certain equipment, or the administration to buy certain equipment, you also now have this breed of people who are not working primarily with politicians, but work primarily with the tech sector and with big money, big finance, in order to create vehicles that then can fund new death-bringing companies whose products will then in the end be bought by the US government. Nick Sinai, an Obama-era White House official, the Obama who won a Nobel Peace Prize, right? That Obama-era White House official, who is now a venture capitalist with Insight Partners, traveled to the Middle East last spring to meet with General Michael E. Kurilla, who observes the Pentagon Central Command operations in the region to suggest ways to enhance military equipment now in use. So these people are even proud of the fact that they then try to enhance the destruction and death-bringing capacity of this equipment all around the world. It is absolutely grotesque and bizarre, and the startup world is now firmly integrated or is getting firmly integrated into the system through the venture capitalist route. Silicon Valley Defense Group, one more of these institutions, has sent letters to members of Congress to push them to invest $1 billion next year in the Defense Innovation Unit, which is distributing a large share of its money to tech startups. So again, like the way that these institutions work together, and then that Congress also invests money directly, and the Pentagon invests money directly, and so that it flows back to the pockets of the people who shelled it out in the first place is huge. And the capacity of the United States to do that is huge, and it is highly immoral. But this is something that is apparently now hip, and that former defense secretaries have no problem with being associated with. They are proud of being associated with it. While many of the startups have yet to win substantial government funding, some are beginning to hit pay dirt. Anduril secured a contract worth up to $1 billion with the US Special Operations Command. Hermeus, the hypersonic jet startup, whose investors include Miss Donnelly's firm, as well as funds set up by the investor Peter Thiel and Sam Altman, the chief executives of OpenAI, recently secured a major defense innovation unit contract. So it is working, and it's working always better. And the military industrial complex is just getting more complex, getting more complicated. It's going to include more and more pieces, and little startups and bright people from very good universities, from the MIT and so on, who can create awesome technologies, are being recruited day in, day out in order to produce more war.